right. Hi, everyone. Welcome. We're going to go ahead and get started. But before I do, anyone in the chat, could you let me know if you can hear me? Awesome. All right. So I know we're a couple minutes early. We're not going to jump into the panel quite yet. What I want to do first is just talk to you a little bit about our organization, the Women of Aeronautics and Astronautics, and then we will jump right into our panel. So, like I said, we are the Women of Aeronautics and Astronautics. You'll hear me refer to us as WOA. And our main goal is to provide support, empowerment, and networking opportunities for women, gender minorities, and other underrepresented individuals in the aerospace field, beginning with university students, but I know we also have some K through 12 students here as well, and a lot of people in industry. So I'm really excited about that, and I'm glad you're here. So we really want to increase female and minority participation in the aerospace field through technical and professional development. And that's kind of where this panel comes in. It's because we want to communicate to those who might be interested in pursuing careers in aerospace but just aren't sure how to go about it. You're like, oh, I can't be a rocket scientist or something like that. The purpose of this panel is to let you know that there are roles for all kinds of different things in aerospace. So that's what we'll be covering today. And of course, we want to create a safe and welcoming place for minorities through mentoring and outreach. I'm sure a lot of you have heard through this thing called the STEM pipeline, where we lose a lot of women and other minorities in pursuing careers in the aerospace industry, whether it's just getting them interested to begin with or keeping them throughout their careers. And one of the factors in making sure women and other gender minorities stay in STEM is making sure that they feel welcome and that there's a place for them in aerospace. So that's another thing that we hope to achieve. And then, of course, that branches into building a supportive community within aerospace. So one thing I just want to bring up before we jump into our panel, because I see we're right at the top of the hour, we had a lot of people, international students, who are interested in this panel today. And though we won't have an opportunity to really talk about international roles or international opportunities within aerospace, I wanted to share WOA India. It's just getting started. They have a panel on October 3rd that looks like a group of really, really amazing women in aerospace. And so if that is something that is of interest to you, there's some information up on the screen for you to follow WOA India. And that right now is currently our only international branch. If you are from another country and you're interested in getting a group like that started, let us know. We'll have some of our information available at the end of the panel for you to connect with us. So, without further ado, give me just a moment and I'm going to switch gears. There we go. And fade over to our panel. Right now you probably see Karina. Awesome. Great. So I didn't introduce myself. I don't know if you can even see my face right now, but that's okay. My name's Amanda Camarata. I am a senior mechanical engineering student at Colorado School of Mines, and I am a part of WOA's National Technical Development Committee. And again, I really wanted to put on this panel because even myself, not very long ago, I still thought that there was no place for me in aerospace. And so if I'm just, older and in my undergraduate years, then I'm sure a lot of people feel that way. And that, of course, seems to be true. So enough about me. Let's go ahead and introduce our panelists. First up, I want to introduce Kat. She is an electrical engineer at NASA's Jet Propulsion Laboratory in California. Kat, will you introduce yourself? Tell us a little bit about you.
So my name is Kat. I am an electrical engineer at NASA's Jet Propulsion Lab. One of my very first missions as an intern was with the Perseverance rover, which I'm super excited that it's on its way to Mars now. And currently I'm working on the Europa Clipper mission. I interned at JPL while I was still a college student. I went to UCLA, so it was really close by for me. I was able to work part-time and commute. And currently my mission, the Europa Clipper mission, we are going to go to Jupiter's moon Europa, which for a very long time was our biggest hope for life in the solar system before the news about Venus came around. But we're still super excited. We are hoping to be able to fly through the plumes of water that have been discovered there. So I work on what is called ground support equipment. We build simulations and these big systems that pretend to be the spacecraft so that we're able to test the computer. So we simulate all different aspects of the spacecraft, pretty much everything but the computer, in order to be able to test functionality, inject errors, and all of that stuff.
Awesome. Thank you so much. Next up, we have Jane Ginsler. She is a Crew Healthcare System Integration Manager at NASA. Hi, Jane. Welcome, and tell us a little bit about yourself.
My name is Jane Ginsler. I work at the NASA Johnson Space Center down in Houston, Texas. And over the past about 7 years now, I've been working on the International Space Station program. I'm in charge of all the crew health and medical equipment that flies on the International Space Station. My undergraduate that I earned years ago was from the University of Texas at Austin. It was in chemical engineering. And following that, I also have a master's in technical management from Embry-Riddle Aeronautical University.
Awesome, thank you. All right, next up we have Stacy Latham. She is an astronaut strength conditioning and rehabilitation specialist at NASA. Welcome, Stacy. Tell us about yourself.
Thanks, Amanda. My name is Stacy Latham, and currently I work in the ACER group, because we have acronyms for everything. So it's the Astronaut Strength Conditioning and Rehabilitation Group. My background is I had my undergraduate degree in athletic training from the University of Northern Iowa, and then obtained my master's in exercise science at Central Missouri State. And primarily, so I've been at NASA for about 5 years, or at Johnson Space Center for about 5 years. Previous to that, I worked in sports medicine departments within like collegiate settings. I've worked in the clinical setting, and then I worked in strength and conditioning and corporate fitness as well. So those roles together as an athletic trainer within injury assessment and rehabilitation, and my background in strength and conditioning. I really wanted to blend those two together. And so that's the job that we have in the group I work in. And so currently we help prepare our astronauts physically for spaceflight, and then monitor and prescribe all their exercise on board the International Space Station. And then when they return home, we do about 45 days of what we call reconditioning, kind of a readaptation to gravity, and it's a little bit different for everybody. It's a really interesting role. Currently, I work with Chris Cassidy, who will return home in about mid-late October, and then I'm scheduled to work with Shana Walker during her SpaceX Crew 1 mission. So it's a lot of fun and a really good time. But I'm really brand new, not brand new, but I'm totally new to the world of aerospace. This was not anything that I thought would be a role that someone in my position would have, let alone that it was something that I desired. But, all in all, we talk about a lot of things within the realm of long duration spaceflight and microgravity, but a lot of it is the same kinds of things that physiologically happen to the body in regards to our musculoskeletal system, either with injuries or, other things on Earth. So I'm really happy to be here. Thanks, you guys.
Wow, super cool. Thank you. Next up, we have Vanessa Lloyd. She's the communications lead for NASA's Exploration and In-Space Services Division. Welcome, Vanessa. Tell us a little bit about what you do and how you got to where you are.
Hi, thank you. So you said NASA's Exploration and In-Space Services Division, kind of a mouthful, so calling it NEXUS, the acronym that it is. If you guys aren't familiar with communications, it's kind of like public relations, marketing, public affairs, all rolled into one. So basically what I do is all about spreading the word and telling the story of the work that my division does. So whether that's developing, web content or writing articles or doing social media or going to events and talking to people about what we do, it's all about getting the word out there. So just creating strategies to do that sort of thing. So as far as what NEXUS actually is, we're working on developing the technologies that surround on-orbit servicing, assembly, and manufacturing. So our flagship mission called OSAM-1, that stands for those things I just mentioned, is going to, for the first time ever, robotically refuel a satellite that wasn't designed to be refueled. And it's going to then manufacture a beam and assemble communications antenna. So all of this completely robotically, picturing two giant robot arms in space doing all this work. And so it's definitely an exciting mission to work on and something that I really enjoy doing. And that's based out of the Goddard Space Flight Center in Maryland. So a little bit about my background and how I got to where I am. I majored in marketing, and after that, I had an internship at the Office of Presidential Correspondence under Obama. And so that was kind of my only non-science communications related role, but it did help me realize that communications and storytelling was something that I always wanted to do. So after that, I worked at World Wildlife Fund and wrote about conservation and species and got the word out there about that. So a much more science communications focused thing, and kind of continued on that path when I went to the Navy's renewable energy program and wrote about renewables. And that was kind of my first foray into writing about really technical topics and kind of condensing it down into a language that the general public could understand. And so actually from that perspective, not having an engineering background helps me because I can communicate with folks that might not understand that super complex element of the missions that we do. So after that, I've always been interested in NASA, who isn't. It's a really cool organization. And I've always been interested in outer space. But what really solidified for me that I wanted to work here was actually when I read The Martian. I don't know if you guys have read that book or watched the movie, but there's a really cool comms person in that book, and she just seemed so cool. And I said, you know what, I want to do that. I already like science communications. I like learning new things. I like storytelling. And so to be able to marry those two together and work at NASA was just a great path forward for me. So I took it. And I will say that as far as applying to NASA, and I'm sure we'll get into this later, but it's kind of hard to work there as a government employee because there's just fewer slots. So something to definitely look into that's the route that I took is working with contractors that work with NASA. And so particularly for me, I looked for a company that does less engineering related things, so ASRC Federal, and decided to apply with them instead. So if you are interested, that's definitely something that I would recommend doing. It's just looking into the contractors that work with NASA. So continue to love what I do, continue to love the science communications element of it all, and just happy to be here. So happy to answer any questions you guys have later on.
Awesome. Thank you. And yeah, I concur. The Martian is a great novel. Free plug for The Martian.
So great.
All right, next up we have Karina Perez Molina. She is the manager for Unmanned and Emerging Aviation Technologies at Aerospace Industries Association. Hi, Karina. Welcome. Can you tell us a little bit about yourself and how you got to where you are?
Hi, Amanda. Thank you. Yes, so I currently work, actually just transitioned into this role within the last 2 weeks from a more comms orientated role. So my current role now is, as you heard, unmanned, working with unmanned and emerging aviation technologies. So that meaning what people call air taxis and all of those things, but that also includes the integration of airspace, radio frequency, all of that management stuff. So it's a lot of new technical stuff, and I studied political science. So this is something completely different and completely new to me. But like Vanessa said, not having that technical background is actually helpful because part of my role is being able to translate a lot of what's happening into terms that other non-technical government officials can understand and Congress can understand, and just the general public can understand. So being able to translate that is actually really helpful. So for my non-STEM folk that are not currently getting an engineering degree or anything like that, there is a role. There is a role for you, and being able to not have that engineering background can help you find your niche and find your spot. And for me, originally, I started because I love space, and I wanted to just go into the stars, and in a very similar way to Vanessa, that I wanted to be kind of like more of that comms person. And for me, it was Uhura from Star Trek that made me think I want to do that fun part of space. And then I started interning with Congress and with the local government, and I ended up where I am now, working in strategy. And I've developed myself over the last 2.5 years, and our civil aviation team had an opening, and they reached out to me about transitioning on to taking this new role, which is completely different than space, a completely new world. But I thought that this was the perfect opportunity to be able to also get myself more integrated into the overall aerospace space world. For me, ultimately, it's about making people know how amazing and incredible our industry is, and that includes anything from launching on Earth all the way to reaching new planets. So that is kind of a long worded version of saying I'm transitioning into a new role. I love space, I love aerospace, and you don't need to have a STEM degree to work in this.
Awesome. Thank you. All right. And last but certainly not least, we have Claire Thomas. She's a mechanical engineering student at Colorado School of Mines, as well as a Brooke Owens Fellow. Can you tell us a little bit about how you got to where you are, a little bit about what this Brooke Owens Fellowship is, and just more about yourself in general?
Yeah, definitely. My name is Claire. I'm, as you said, at Colorado School of Mines. I'm going into my last year, fifth and last year, in mechanical engineering. My path to where I am was certainly not linear. So I might be speaking more to those of y'all in high school or K through 12. I actually ended up dropping out of high school because I missed 2 years, and later decided getting a GED is probably a good idea. So during that time, I read Stephen Hawking's Brief History of Time, and I was like, I'm going to be an astrophysicist. That changed, but my passion for space stayed. And since then, I went to community college for a year, worked really, really hard, played on the soccer team, worked outside of school, and also went to a program called NCOS, NASA Community College Aerospace Scholars, which was really, really fun, and that kind of opened a few more doors for me. And then I transitioned to Colorado School of Mines, where now I've had the opportunity to intern at a few amazing companies. I started at a company called Lunar Outpost, which is a very small startup working on in situ resource utilization. And then recently I got to intern at Sierra Nevada Corporation, working on growing plants in space, as well as a trash compactor, which was actually really fun. And then I got this thing called the Brooke Owens Fellowship, which if there are any female or gender minority students in the audience here in their undergrad, I would highly, highly recommend applying. They pair you with an internship for the summer. I got paired with Made in Space, so doing additive manufacturing in space. And they also pair you with an executive mentor. I got paired with someone called Miss Nicole Stott. She is actually an astronaut, and like having a one-on-one like mentorship conversation with an astronaut is pretty cool. So yeah, that is a bit about my background and how I got to where I am now. A little bit of a baby compared to everyone else here though. Thank you.
Thank you. Not a worry. I really wanted to be able to kind of show things from where you start, where you can start at the very beginning to where you could be kind of a little bit later in the career. So yeah, thanks for sharing. So let's jump into some questions. Everyone has some really great, amazing, and unique backgrounds. And usually the common theme with pretty much anyone trying to either break into the aerospace industry, or even if you've been in the aerospace industry for some time, is dealing with moments of imposter syndrome. So one of the questions we got from our audience is, how do you deal with moments where you feel like you don't fit in the industry? And what are some things or advice that you have to deal with those moments? This is open to everybody. If you want to take a second to stew on it, and then just pop in whenever you want.
Okay, I can hop in, I guess. I guess I would say that one of the ways that I, as far as feeling imposter syndrome in relation to working with a lot of engineers when I'm not one, is just realizing that we all have our different talents. And I'm not saying that this is all engineers by any means, but I have read some engineers writing, and I realized like, hey, I'm better at this. And you guys are much better at math, and that's okay. Like, we each have our own talents, and that's why we work together in this great way. And I think it's just helping to remind yourself that you bring something to the table as well. And I know that's easier said than done, but just continuing to remind yourself of that, I think, is important.
Yeah, and the other thing I would add to that is acknowledging that you earned the position that you're in. I know I've worked really hard in my career in a lot of other areas that I didn't know would prepare me for my role at NASA, but definitely did. And whether that's, communication, developing relationships with individuals, because the people aspect is where I work. It's not, in an engineering or, robotics type of role with what a lot of NASA ends up being, it seems to me. But knowing that, believe Vanessa just said that, it is what you bring to the table. And there's a really great book, Range, by David Epstein, that talks about just those things. The generalists are what, end up bringing a lot of context to problem solving, to, group dynamics that really enhance what we have. And I think that is the goal of NASA and trying to solve, some of these problems that end up coming our way with sending people to space and for long duration. And I know that, my background is in college athletics and teaching people how to lift weights correctly. Well, what I can bring enhances exactly what we're trying to solve and go forward with. And then I get to work with other awesome people and have those great interactions and those ahas. I work with Jane Ginsler quite a bit, and when I'm thinking one way and she's thinking another way, we're going to end up coming together at some point with our both separate experiences for this one shared issue. So I've had that imposter syndrome, but you step back, you acknowledge, hey, I worked really hard to get to whatever point it is, or I'm continuing to work to that point. And, I have a seat here because whether it's here for me or not, I brought my own chair. So.
Yeah, and I think I would kind of like to add to that. I'm taking on this new role from mostly space world into full-on emerging technology and aviation. For a second, sometimes I felt like I was like, am I even qualified to take on this role? And then I thought to myself, wait, it's being offered to you. Why are you questioning it? Why are you questioning yourself? So sometimes I think maybe stop questioning yourself or stop thinking that you are not supposed to be there is kind of the first step, is acknowledging that you are there because you're supposed to be there, and stopping that internal questioning of am I good enough for this? Am I supposed to be doing this? What is happening? Sometimes you just have to tell yourself, wait, stop questioning. This is happening for a reason. You are supposed to be here, and then just keep working, because that's all you can do once you're there. Is just keep working hard and keep showing them that you are supposed to be there.
Would anyone else like to add on to any of that?
I just want to add one last thing. So I think something that is very common for me, being a somewhat public figure, because I do have, an Instagram account, and I have a TikTok and a YouTube channel where I talk a lot about my experiences. And so sometimes it can get really difficult because you're exposing yourself to a lot of people that don't actually know who you are. They don't know how you got here. They don't know your resume. They don't really know anything, right? And so on places like TikTok, where you're suddenly exposed to, for example, one of my videos got 5 million views, which is crazy to think about. But then I was also being bombarded with all of these comments that were saying things like, oh, well, it's because you're a woman. It's because they needed to satisfy their minority requirement. That's why you're there. Oh, it's because you're pretty. Oh, what did you have to do with your boss for them to hire you? And so all of those things obviously also are things that we as women and as minorities have to deal with. And all of that just helps feed into that imposter syndrome that we're already struggling with. So definitely the questioning is the biggest thing that I had to do of, okay, these people don't know me. They don't know how I got here. And really also it doesn't even matter. And so when it's no longer a person that's outside saying these comments and you're saying them to yourself, it's even more hurtful. So it's also, you have to learn how to treat that as this comment is not constructive. This comment is possibly not, it's just coming out of fear. It's coming out of anxiety. It's coming out of all of these different places. So it's really important to learn how to recognize those comments and all of those false criticisms that we also place on ourselves and setting them aside.
I guess I have one little thing to add as well. Fun little fact, when I applied to the Brooke Owens Fellowship, I was actually rejected initially and added on at the last minute. And so I was extremely excited, but then I was also like, wait a second, what did I do wrong? And what I've kind of learned, because I'm, my own harshest critic, is I need to step back and ask myself what a friend would tell me. If they were in a what I would tell a friend if they were in a similar situation. I would not tell them, you're not worth that, you're not whatever. I'd say, look, you worked this hard, you've done all these things, you are definitely deserving of this. So, yeah.
Yeah, absolutely. We've definitely all been there for sure. Any last thoughts before we move on to the next question? Okay. So the next question I have from our audience actually can be derived, I think, from some of the conversations that, or some of the information that you all shared earlier. And the question is, sometimes not having enough technical information or background in aerospace can feel overwhelming. What is your advice for someone looking to improve their technical knowledge? And I think I'll just add that this can be open to any of you, whether you're a non-technical person trying to enhance your technical knowledge so you can communicate better with people on the more technical side, or you're interested in being an engineer and you want to improve your own technical knowledge.
Well, not being from a technical side and definitely working in a physical science and then coming to a different kind of science environment, for me, learning these ropes has just really, I found it's been really helpful when I ask people to share with me about their roles and about what they're doing. People are, especially people here at NASA, are very excited about what they're doing and are very invested in this, kind of overall mission as well as all the individual missions. But hearing, each person's, nugget of that really helps me, to develop those relationships, which is really, really important, but then also to better understand this bigger context and all the pieces that play a huge role in what we do. And then, then that allows me to share with that individual what I do, which, people have a lot of misconceptions about what kind of role I would have in this environment. So it's just really been a great way to reach out and to communicate with people. And that's not sometimes the easiest thing to do, but it's a cup of coffee. It's, hey, can I come to your lab? Or can, we go over, this project? It's just really great in that regard. So that's my best advice.
Yeah, so let me expand upon that a little bit. So, in my job, I'm in charge of a lot of different pieces of hardware that fly on International Space Station. And by no means am I the subject matter expert on any of the pieces of hardware. And what I will tell you is, just like Stacy does, I do reach out to my subject matter experts quite a bit. I've got new hardware flying on the International Space Station doing biomolecular sequencing. I am not a biomolecular, engineer, nor am I a biomolecular scientist, but I know who to go go ask the right questions, to get smart on the hardware, so that I can sound competent to my managers when I'm talking about the hardware or helping out the group. Another piece of hardware that I've been working on with Stacy actually is our new exploration exercise device that's coming to International Space Station. And one of the things that the Human Performance Directorate mandated was that the crew has to be able to stand up while they're exercising on the device. And so I didn't get it. I didn't understand why. I thought, you could do exercises on your knees, if they were exercises where you had to lift a bar over your head. So I went over to the facility that Stacy trains at and sat down with her and another ACER, and they literally put me on a piece of exercise hardware so I could feel why it was a requirement. And so, from that standpoint, I pulled on my experts, had them help teach me and help me understand what the requirements were so that I can go and push on our partners to make sure that those requirements were included in our hardware design.
So just to add a little bit onto that, same general gist, but when I started at NASA almost 4 years ago, I probably had heard the word spacecraft like twice in my life, and I had gotten to NASA and immediately I was supposed to go to a launch in a few weeks and write an article about our mission that had the word spacecraft and autopilot and rendezvous all over the place. And I had no idea what I was doing, and I felt like I didn't speak the language at all. And for a brief moment, I was like, should I just quit? Like, I don't want to do any of this. Why? That's when the imposter syndrome thing comes back. But I definitely think it's a question of, I just, started sitting down with people that knew things, like you guys mentioned, and asking them the right questions. And I think the most important thing there for me in particular was not being afraid to sound dumb or to ask questions that might sound dumb to people that already know this stuff. Particularly because I kept reminding myself, like, if I don't get this, average whomever's on the street reading this article is also not going to get this. So, like, I have to understand. So I think just not being afraid to ask silly questions, because you'll find people are really passionate about this stuff and they want to talk about it and they want you to understand and they want to explain it. So I think, like, obviously, like, reading articles and familiarizing yourself with things that way is really helpful too. But for me, it's much more helpful to just be able to sit down and ask people to literally explain it to me like I'm 5 years old. And that's how I take it away.
I guess
One thing I think sorry. I was just going to add one theme that I think is going through with this is being your authentic self. I mean, we all are talking about our passion and our desire to gain knowledge, not because we think it's going to make ourselves better, but it's going to make, an overall greater goal achievable. So I think that is huge, is just being your authentic, genuine self when you're putting these efforts in. It makes a world of difference. And
one thing I'll say from a student's perspective is, for example, I'm really interested in lunar science, but my major is mechanical engineering. So what I decided to do is I joined the lunar listserv. And so they send out a bunch of white papers and all sorts of information. And if I have the time and I'm interested, I can click on a white paper and read it through. So I'm gaining more knowledge on lunar science while I'm still in my degree. And you can do that for all sorts of different things. There are blogs and listservs and all sorts of things out there.
Yeah, and I would also add that good old research always helps. Sitting down and just looking things up and, kind of getting at least a very basis understanding, and then from there getting some of the questions that you might need more elaboration on, just being able to come to the table like thinking, okay, so I think I get this, but can you just talk me through XYZ? Like, can you maybe help me figure out what this actually means? I read it and I just did not get it, or I got this part. Can you help me figure out the rest? And also, you never know, you might find a mentor that way. You might find a friend. You might find opportunities. I know I found quite a bit of opportunities and mentors by just reaching out to people and saying, hey, I try to understand what your research, I got to this point. Can you please help me figure out the rest? And you will figure out that a lot of people in this industry are just really passionate about what they're doing, and they're going to be more than willing to help you understand what they're doing and to share what they're doing, because ultimately, everyone loves their work, and so they're happy to talk about it. So don't be afraid to reach out to them.
One great tip that I have is that from a technical standpoint, us engineers are resource hoarders. We love to hoard resources, textbooks, technical documents, anything that may have helped us while we were working on a project. We do not erase anything. At least for me and all the people in my team, we have documents dating back years from when I was working on a specific project, and these are all the things that I collected from my research that helped me. I have it in a folder. So, for example, I have an intern this summer, and he was asking me all kinds of questions about, technical questions about electronics, about PCB design. And I would just, anytime he asked me a question, I would sit down with him, talk to him about it, explain everything, and then be like, and here's your homework. Here's 3 documents that you can read. Let me know if you have any questions from that. He just recently asked me another question, and then I sent him, I answered it, and then I sent him like another 2 documents. And it was really awesome because this is a question that he had. I helped him come up with the answer, and then I gave him more resources, and he actually ended up finding something in a board that would have caused a mistake, essentially. So it was a really good, like, full circle moment. So definitely when you're having these conversations with people, also ask them, hey, do you have anything related to this that I can also read later on? Because I guarantee you they will have plenty.
Any other thoughts? I will say that I wholeheartedly agree with all that. And if I could very briefly add, I'm not a panelist, but putting yourself out there is one of the hardest things to do, but it's really going to bring you a long way. It's one of the reasons why I joined WOA to begin with, because it's difficult when you join an amazing organization like that, but you're working with like women who are working on their PhDs at MIT and all that stuff. It can really make you feel so inadequate. But doing that just made me realize that we're all really similar and we all deal with the same issues. And networking and putting myself out there and just meeting people in the industry has really raised my confidence to just kind of keep pushing through. So that's all I'll add on that bit. So I want to transition a little bit. We have a few questions for specific panelists, but after the panelist answers, if anybody wants to add on to that, please feel free. This question is for Vanessa, and she says, I'm a woman leaving the communication industry to pursue a career in the aerospace sector. How are communications needed in the space and aerospace industry?
Sure. So that's a great question. I think it's needed in a lot of different ways. So first of all, you need to be able to explain to the general public the missions that you're doing, why they matter, and why people should care. And the main reason behind that is because at the end of the day, NASA is a taxpayer-funded agency. And so essentially, like, we work for the American public. And so we have an obligation to inform everyone what's going on and how their tax dollars are being put to good use. And, taking it one step beyond that, kind of the cool factor, because no one's going to care if you're just, putting out dry information about what it is. Like, if you guys are familiar with Simon Sinek, he has this really interesting speech and book about starting with the why. So it's like whenever you communicate something, it's important to first tell people why it matters. Then you can get into like what it actually is and what you do, but first start with why it matters. And so I think that from that perspective, communicating why our missions matter, why the work that we do matters, what it's going to lead to, all the groundbreaking discoveries that it has the potential to lead to, is a really important part of what we do. And that's on kind of the general public side of it. Beyond that, we also have specific stakeholders that we have to reach. So I know that Karina mentioned, Congress needs to know about what we're doing because ultimately they're in charge of appropriations. So figuring out which missions get funded and kind of deciding how to do that. So we need to make sure that they know about our missions and that they care and that they understand. And there's stakeholders beyond that as well, right? Because we work with different commercial partners and international partners and other government agencies. And so basically there's a whole different set of stakeholders that we need to get this information out there to, and it's always packaged differently. It's always different kind of messaging. So it's just about getting the right information in the right format to all these different people to whom it would matter. And I think that, I like to use the metaphor of like, if a tree falls in the forest and no one's around to hear it, does it even make a sound? And that's how I feel about communications, right? Like if all this stuff is happening and you're not talking about it, does it matter? I mean, it does, but it's important that people know about it. And so I think from that perspective, that's when communications is really important. I hope that answers your question, but if not, I'm sure Karina, who also works in comms, can tell you more about it.
Yeah, I was just about to say, like, from the government perspective, if communicating the other way around from private sector to government, you also need to be able to, explain what's happening and they have their jobs. Like a congressional office is not going to be able to focus on 300 plus companies and what they're doing or what's happening even in like within their district. Sometimes you need to be able to like package that and explain to them what is happening. And I will tell you, like, comms is really important. I cannot do one single thing in my job without always running to comms to make sure that, hey, is this right for this audience? Do you think this is okay? Should I change this? Like, will it make sense? Like, you need comms for everything because ultimately they really are the best advocates for anything that is done within the industry. So you will always need comms. So I mean, I biasly would say you could stay in comms and continue to do that type of work. But I mean, even this is comms, and Amanda doing this kind of thing, putting these panels together to do outreach, that is also some of SciComm. So I think comms really is like almost like a bloodline of a lot of this, because you can't get a signature if people don't know what's happening. And you need to be able to communicate properly what is happening. So I say that comms is one of the most vital things. And right now I work with more of a technical group, but I will always go back to the comms team. And that's just making sure that I know that I'm reaching the audience correctly.
Great, thank you. Yeah, I think that absolutely answers the question. Did anybody else want to chime in before we move on to the next question? All right, so our next question is for Kat, and they've asked, how can electronics and communication engineering student be prepared for aerospace? And I'm also, as someone who is terrified of electronics and circuits, also a little curious just in general what electrical engineers do and what their day-to-day tasks might look like.
Yeah, so electrical engineering is extremely broad. And this is something that's very unique to our country and a few other countries, because in some other places, for example, Mexico, it actually gets split up into different careers, and you take each one of them independently. So that's something that's very unique to us and makes us as electrical engineers so prepared to take on so many different kinds of careers. So having said that, within NASA, there's room for every single one of those subsets of electrical engineering. We have what I do, which is electronics design, and then we have, for example, there's someone that can do the actual electronics board, the PCB, but then there's also people who design the actual chips, which are just the spider-looking chips that you might see sometimes on the different boards. So that's an entire circuit that has been shrunk down into a tiny little piece. There are people that work on photonics. How do we take light and how do we make electronics out of it? So there are so many of those different things that come into play. And the really cool thing about electrical engineering is that once you learn those basics, it's really easy to go into whatever different industries you're interested in. So when I entered the aerospace industry, there wasn't really that much that I needed outside of work to prepare myself. It's kind of one of those things where you have the knowledge, you have the basics, you have the understanding, and now that you're in here, it's how do we apply that into our own application? So the difference in aerospace is that, we are working with something that you can't just send to Jupiter and then expect to fix if something goes wrong, especially with the electronics. So radiation is something we really have to think about. We're really limited to a certain amount of parts that have already been approved for space flight. So that makes it a little bit harder. There is, for example, the redundancy. We have to be redundant with everything that we do. If there is something that could potentially fail, then we have to have a redundant system to back it up at all times, no matter what. There is an understanding of a fundamental understanding of the actual electronics that you learn in school that really helps you in aerospace, because understanding the different failure modes is really important. That's something that I do at work. When I'm choosing a part, I have to understand what are the different ways that this part can fail, and how do we apply that into our own application. So the difference in aerospace is that, we are working with something that you can't just send to Jupiter and then expect to fix if something goes wrong, especially with the electronics. So radiation is something we really have to think about. We're really limited to a certain amount of parts that have already been approved for space flight. So that makes it a little bit harder. There and in my design, incorporate failure-safe mechanisms and backup circuits. So it's really one of those things where the best thing that you can do to prepare for a career in this field is to really, really know your stuff, all the way down to the most basic fundamentals. That is what is going to essentially really make you stand out in this field.
Awesome, Kat. Thank you. I'm going to move over to Claire. I have a pretty similar-ish question for you. So like you, I'm also a mechanical engineer, and mechanical engineering itself can be really broad. Like in electrical engineering, it's just something that can be applied to everything. So my question for you is kind of, Claire, as you've gone through your internships, your fellowship, have you been able to narrow down what you've wanted to focus on within aerospace? Because aerospace itself is also really broad. And if you have, how did you do that? And if not, how's that going?
Okay, that's a really good question. I've gotten to work on a number of different, I guess, applications of mechanical engineering with aerospace, and I have narrowed it down slightly. I know, unlike a lot of people, I don't want to work on rockets. I don't really care that much, and I know that's going to hurt a few people, but that's not my thing. I don't want to work on a giant project with like hundreds and hundreds of people on it. I like my small teams. Something I learned at S&C is that I really, really like ECLS, Environmental Control and Life Support Systems, except not HVAC or thermal control, because those also don't interest me particularly. I enjoyed working on the trash compactor, which is essentially trying to close the loop of water consumption in space. So we heat stuff up, squish it in a vacuum, and extract whatever water remains. I liked that a lot, and I worked with a team that was maybe 10 people. I really enjoyed that. And I also, the second thing I really enjoy is ISRU, in situ resource utilization. So space mining and that sort of thing. I know that is how we're going to get to Mars and be sustainable on the moon and Earth independent. And so I don't know, I just find that really, really interesting and breaking through that sort of new technology. Hope that answers your question.
Yeah, absolutely. Thank you. Transitioning just a little, my next question is for Karina. We had a few people that were interested in the government side. I know you mentioned that you've worked with Congress a little bit. Can you expand and discuss a little bit more about what that type of work looked like for you?
Yeah, of course. So I actually studied political science. My main interest was the policy side of things. Now I finally transitioned to a policy role, but I started everything with internships, and I highly recommend, if you want to work with the government side of things, to start with some internships and get your feet wet and get to see what it actually is all about. When I started with the U.S. House Science Committee on the U.S. Science Committee. Wow, I'm blanking. The Science, Space, and Technology Committee for Congress. And basically there, I spent about 6 months doing research on missions. So sometimes you have to understand the missions, because not sometimes, you always have to understand the missions, because you have to allocate funds for them. And you have to see what goes, what stays, how everything gets divided. So that's always fun. And then you also have to do hearings, so congressional hearings, where you hear from experts in certain topics, and kind of, this is more to become informed, for the Congress members to become informed or to talk about different issues. And that's also a lot of research, a lot of prep, a lot of having to talk with experts beforehand on what is actually happening, because not only do you have to prepare for the committee side of things, you also have to prepare the congressional offices, and you have to provide material for them. So there's a lot of moving parts, and it almost feels a little bit like, I don't know if there's any theater kids, but preparing for a play, really just like making the script, creating all this research, putting everything together, and then also pushing it to the press and saying, hey, look at what's happening, look at all these things. So that was more the congressional side. Then I also worked with more local government, which was the LA office, the LA Mayor's Office of Economic Development. where I focus really on the aerospace sector. And for that one was a little bit different because while it's smaller, you have a lot more stakeholders that care more deeply because they're right there and everything you do will affect them. So one of the things that I worked on was aerospace jurisdiction. And so figuring out at that point if drones could fly or where they could fly or how high or, you know, all of those things. So you have to, one, understand the technology, but two, really understand the applications and the effects it would have on people's lives. So policy will always kind of go back to how will this affect people? What is the actual like application? And also like how much does it cost? You will have to learn a lot about like funds and appropriations and budgets. Government work, especially in the policy side, does always have a budget line. So being able to understand that and also justify that. There's this really fun process where agencies have to do budget justifications, where they have to explain to Congress why their program should stay. So also another side of why comms is important, because you can say it'll stay because of all these technical things, or you can say it'll stay because it will help us find more sustainable ways of living both in space and on Earth. It changes things a little bit in the way that they are that people will take them in. So government really takes a lot of, it's a big spectrum of what you can do in government, but my biggest recommendation is try to get an internship. And honestly, congressional internships are easier to get than you would expect, especially because there are so many offices. Think about how many representatives there are, think about how many committees there are, how many senators there are, and each office will take like 2 to 3 interns. So there's always opportunity to be able to get your feet wet there. And also you can enter locally. You can look at your mayor's office, you can look at your state legislature and really try to get to work with them. And like I said, you would be surprised how easier it can be to enter the industry in that way, to be able to say, I care about this issue, I care about the policy, how can I help, what can I do? And I could go on and on about like what government work or working in government can do, but that's mostly from the policy side. Then you also have the agency side, which I know a little bit about, but that's a whole nother beast.
Awesome. Thank you so much. Thanks for the information about the internships. I know a lot of people here are also interested in that monster as a college student. So we're running a little short on time. I know this is we're all really passionate about aerospace, and we could probably talk about things like this for hours and hours, but I want to be respectful to your time. I know, Karina, you're on the East Coast. I know for me it would be my bedtime by now. So if I didn't get to ask you a specific question to you, I'm so sorry. We might try to follow up with you a little bit later to see if we can answer some more questions and send it out to our audience. And so same goes for you, audience. If I didn't get to ask your question, I'm sorry. There are so many of you wonderful people that were really interested in this topic, and we just didn't have enough time to get through all of them. So to wrap up, I have one final question. Let me find it. Where did it go? Okay. So our final question for everybody is, what advice do you have for students? And I'll expand this by saying anybody, students, K through 12, people that work in one industry that might want to transition into aerospace, everybody. What advice do you have for them who are interested in pursuing roles in aerospace but aren't really sure how to go about it? Where do they start? What can they do?
I could start real quick. I would say apply for things. You see something cool, you're not quite qualified, apply. It doesn't hurt, and you get a lot of fancy rejection letters, but you also get some acceptance letters in the process.
I think that's great. Mine was really following along the same lines as Claire, is to figure out what you're passionate about. If you don't know, I took a very serendipitous path to get to where I am today, but I love my current job. You know, when I started out and I graduated from college, I actually did sales for a chemical company. Loved that job, but it didn't quite suit my needs at the time because I wanted to start a family. And that's how I ended up at NASA. I knew somebody who said, "Hey, Jane, they lifted the hiring freeze. Come on over. And I actually worked in the Mission Operations Directorate, working console in the Mission Control Center with my first job at NASA. So that was super cool. But really what I knew I'd always wanted to do was I wanted to do something in medicine. And so as I worked my way through the different jobs, this opportunity in the International Space Station program came up to, work on all the crew health and medical hardware. And even though I have a chemical engineering degree, it actually aligns well with the interests I have. So figure out what your interests are, figure out what your strengths are, and then utilize that to go find the right job. And, and for younger folks, you'll probably go and have a variety of different jobs, and you'll find what you like and you don't like. I probably had 5 different jobs at NASA, and I finally figured out, you know what, I like this one, I don't like this one. I'm pretty happy now. So actually, this is the longest I've been in a job in a while, and I've been here about 7 years now. So figure out what you're passionate about, and the only way to do that is to go find different jobs, find different careers, and figure out what you don't like and what you like.
I agree with everything Jane just said. And then I just want to add on that the things that have also helped me along that way, because I've also had a very winding path where I've been able to learn what I like. I learn from supervisors and experiences of what I don't want to do and how I don't want to be managed or manage. And I've been able to then identify like my personal core values and my professional values, and then seeking out areas where I'm going to be able to be fulfilled in those values in what I do. And so that's been really, really important to me. One of my highest professional values is being of service. And so the fact, providing a service in what I do as an astronaut, strength conditioning and rehabilitation is huge. And that one-on-one stuff with my crew members is really important to me. So I knew that early on, and have been able to find good stuff in having those identified.
I would just add, as far as, finding out what you like, obviously internships are a great way to do that. But I would also recommend either finding mentors if you can within the industry that you'd like to break into, or even just finding people that might have a job that you want to do on LinkedIn and messaging them and asking to speak to them about kind of what they do to get a better idea. As we mentioned, like, people are busy, but they also love to talk about what they do. And I've definitely done that and had pretty good success just having, like, emailing back and forth with someone or speaking with them about what they do to get a better idea of if that's something I would be interested in. So I definitely just recommend not being afraid to reach out to people. And if you can, definitely finding a mentor that can help guide you, because every mentor that I've had has really helped me in my career. And I just can't overemphasize the importance of that. So.
Yeah, I think I really want to echo that mentorship section and reaching out to people. Again, I would not be here without my mentors and them telling me, or pushing me to actually do something. And also to talk, apply for things. Like Harry said, just apply for all the things that you think would be cool and that you might like. You never know what would happen. I'm actually at my current job because of a rejection from the Brooke Owens Fellowship. I applied my last year of college. I got through all of the interview process, but through the interview process, I met my mentor, who then introduced me to who hired me in my current company. So you never ever know what will happen if you just put yourself out there, if you just reach out, if you just ask questions, and also just be yourself and be completely open and apologetic about who you are and about what you love. And trust me, people will see that, and they will just say, oh, okay, let me figure out a way to just either give you information or help you out.
Yeah, I definitely want to add to that. I think one of the biggest reasons why I didn't apply for NASA or the Jet Propulsion Lab until later on in my college career is because I was afraid. This was my dream job for as long as I can remember. I remember being 10, 11 years old telling my parents, I want to be a NASA engineer. And so I didn't think I could handle that rejection, and I waited and I waited. But you know, my mom always told me, if you don't do it, you don't apply, you don't take those chances, you're the one that's rejecting yourself. And you're the one that is already failing yourself because you never even gave yourself that shot to begin with. And if you do see a rejection and you do see failure, which is going to happen, that doesn't mean that it's not for you, and that doesn't mean that you should just stop and that's it. So if I had, you know, listened to those thoughts and the fear of rejection and the fear of failure, then I wouldn't be here, and I wouldn't have done half the things I've already done, because really half the things I've done, I applied and I was thinking, oh, there's no way I'm going to get this. And then I would get it. And then I would go to the next thing and think, oh, no, there's no way I'm going to get this. And then I would get it. So really, it was just letting go of that fear and going for it. I think one of the biggest things that really caught my eye is after my internship, they had me apply again just to be in the system as I was applying for a full-time position. And I was reading the requirements list supposedly for my job, and I was like, what is this? Like, the requirements was basically a list of everything that my entire group, which is made up of a lot of different kinds of engineers, all of us together do, not one person. So when you're looking at those requirements and you're seeing that and you're saying, oh, that is not me, I only know one of those things, you know, most of the time, no one's really expecting you to know all of that. And so if you qualify for a few of those things, then just go ahead, apply, because it's a known thing that those job descriptions are just crazy.
Awesome. Thank you so much. Any final thoughts? All right. Well, I want to give a huge, huge, huge thank you to all of our panelists tonight. I think we learned a great deal from you all. I want to echo, because we had some comments in the chat, mentors, so important. Another thing, failure, it's going to happen. I can say this is my second time in college. I basically failed out of aerospace engineering my very first time in college, and now I'm back, and I'm really, really close to graduating. So it's really, for me, just a mentality of just believing you can do it, and then putting the work behind it, because it's not easy. And not just engineering, any aspect of being in aerospace is challenging. And it's really just about putting your passion and work behind it. So with that being said, to wrap up, thank you all for attending. Feel free to email me. My email's on the screen if you have any comments or feedback for our session. If you have questions about aerospace or getting involved with WOA in general, that information's on the screen as well. You can reach out to us through Facebook, Instagram, all that good stuff. I know some people were interested in the social media handles for some of the people on there, so I will get that information for you if they want to share it, and then I'll share that with you. Thank you all for being here. Final thoughts is this panel was not to convince anyone not to go be a rocket scientist in aerospace. If that is your passion, please, please, please do it. Even if it's hard, but if you're like, rockets are cool and I want to do that. I'm not very like intellectual right now, but I'm just so excited. But please, please do it. There's space for everyone in aerospace, and I hope that that was conveyed through this panel. But we only covered just a tiny, tiny handful of the types of positions in aerospace. So if you want to see more, if there was something that we didn't cover that you wanted to see, again, please let us know. So with those final long thoughts, thank you again for being here, and I hope you all have a great night.
Thanks. Bye.